This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com, where today we are previewing the Daytona 500 from a betting perspective with Dr. Nick Giffen of the Action Network and Fantasy Labs getting his thoughts on this year's fields, plus some championship odds as well. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Dr. Ed Feng. You can find his work over at the PowerRank.com. And Ed, you were all over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We talked in Week 15 from an NFC perspective. You were on them against the Packers. You were on them against the Chiefs. Now the Super Bowl champs. Got to make you feel pretty good about your numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty excited. I think in terms of the Super Bowl, predicting Kansas City with 9 points, that wasn't anywhere near my expectation of how that was going to go down. But the numbers definitely saw some strength in Tampa Bay's defense that I'm not sure a lot of I don't know if other models did, but I think there was strength in the defensive side of the ball. There was upside with them on the offensive side of the ball. So yeah, very happy with how that turned out.
So you talked about the upside when we talked in Week 15 and why you like the Bucs to win the NFC. Is that something you can quantify within your model, or is that something that you were looking at the odds and saying, okay, I think this team has room for upward growth and doing it based on that? Yeah,
I think so. Everything for me is based on what my model says, right? But then you acknowledge that there's some error in that. And I think when you want to say, well, is my model too low or too high on this team? And I think from watching them play, from knowing, seeing Brady's PFF pass grades, and that was at a point in the season where I hadn't really seen him enough to make my own estimate for how he was playing, knowing the talent of Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and the receiving core. You have to guess that, their offensive, especially their pass offense is probably a little bit better than what their numbers were. I think they ended up like 7th in the NFL. Actually, I didn't check it after the Super Bowl, but I think it's just taking other information both from, various sources, especially watching the game and saying, okay, my model's probably a little bit low on this. And no model's perfect. We all know that. And so we can just kind of guess which way it's wrong in.
Yeah, and you guessed well. So kudos on that. We'll talk more about Super Bowl bets here in just 1 second. But first, today, our guest is Dr. Nick Giffen. He is on Twitter at RotoDoc. He does NASCAR DFS stuff for Fantasy Labs, also does betting content for the Action Network. We're going to talk about the Daytona 500 with Nick, get his thoughts on that, some outrights he likes, some other markets he's looking at, also talking driver changes and new teams for Bubba Wallace and Daniel Suarez, and seeing Nick's thoughts on them. That's coming up here in just 1 second. But first, we're now into the off-season of Covering the Spread, so make sure you are subscribed to get our podcasts right as they go live, because scheduling, we'll still have one per week, maybe a different time though, potentially based on not having the same schedule with no NFL. So make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts, and while you're there, leave us a rating and review, because that does help us out a ton. Now, before we get to Nick and talk about the Daytona 500, got to go back to this past week and talk about Super Bowl 55, and a pretty good week for the guests we had on here for Covering the Spread.
Covering the past.
Let's bring Nick Giffen into Covering the Spread to preview the Daytona 500 coming up on Sunday. Nick, it's the best time of the year, the actual Super Bowl coming up on Sunday. How you doing?
Yeah. I mean, you nailed it. That's what I tweeted out this past Sunday was the real Super Bowls in a week. So I'm doing great. We got a little clash action under our belt already, so we whetted the appetite. I'm ready for Sunday.
Absolutely, and it's a different format this year, because in the past we've had qualifying on Sunday followed by the clash, and this year it's different because we don't have that weekend ahead of time. But the reason that I think it's kind of fun, and I want to get your take on this, is that we actually have on-track activity Tuesday through Sunday as opposed to having these weird off days in between. So personally, I kind of like this schedule a little bit more. Am I just being reactive to recency bias here, or are you on board with this 2021 schedule as well?
Totally on board. And obviously I think given the current times we're living in, I think it's very appropriate, but I think It's actually better that it's so much more compact. I look at something like the Indy 500, which was like a month-long event. I prefer the week-long compact event, and here for NASCAR, they've compacted it to Tuesday through Sunday now, and there's no off time. You're not like, oh, this guy won the poll, now we have to wait 3 days for something to happen, right? So I like it.
Yeah, I do too. I think that last night was a lot of fun. Looking forward to the next couple of days as well, and plenty of betting opportunities too. And we're going to talk about betting here in just a second. But Nick, one thing you're doing this year for Fantasy Labs, you're building out their DFS model, building out projections and stuff like that for the site. And there's a big overlap between building that and building out a betting model. So what data forms the main components of that model? I'm not asking you to like give away your secrets or anything here, but you know, what data are you leaning on to build that model for Fantasy Labs?
Sure. Well, I think there's some things that aren't really a big secret. You know, NASCAR provides loop data for every single race, and they have been since 2005. And that loop data is very important because it'll tell you things like a driver's average running position, or the quality pass percentage, or the driver rating. They've also, in more recent years, begun to pull average green flag speed. Obviously, practice data, when we do have practices, matters a lot now. This year, of course, we're only going to have 8 races with practice. So it's going to be interesting, you know, to build the model without practice. Man, we did a lot of that last year as well. But it definitely reduces some of the predictability by not having practice data. However, you know, there's all this data. We got the loop data. We've got some other data, like I said, the average green flag speed and practice when we do have it. And that kind of all goes into, I build what's called a random forest model. It's a type of machine learning statistical model that basically pulls from the data itself and figures out what are the actual best components to use in the model, and you know, what is the best predictability that it can give. And I actually do lots of different random forests, and I blend them all together in a weighted average to kind of give the highest predictability. So it's like really technical stuff, but point is, you're looking at the loop data. I'm looking at the same thing all of you are looking at, probably. Driver ratings, average green flag speed. I'm just letting the machine do it instead of my own biases do it.
Oh, that's really cool. So random forest, those are decision trees, right? And
yeah. It's like a lot of different decision trees.
So, you know, in decision trees, if correct me if I'm wrong, but that's where you make a decision. You split it based on the data at different points, and then you're averaging over a bunch of those.
Exactly.
You're subsampling your data? Is that?
Yep, exactly. So I have, you know, a prediction or a training set and then a test set, and I kind of randomly divide the test set so that I'm, you know, just making sure we're making the best predictions possible on unseen data. That way we get, you know, because the next race is going to be unseen as well. So we want to make sure we're just kind of just training and testing the model appropriately.
So the last time I thought about these types of models is a long time ago, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more of a black boxy type model where it doesn't necessarily, you don't know exactly why the forest is spitting out what it is at you. Does that worry you at all, or?
No, it doesn't worry me too much. The couple of the things I do, of course, is I try to make sure I don't have a lot of correlated inputs going in, so I do a lot of things to reduce what we call multi-collinearity, big statistical term. But anyway, I'm not too worried about that, because what I'm worried about is the accuracy of the predictions. I don't necessarily care as much why. I don't know if it's average green flag speed correlated with this factor, correlated with that factor in different changing ways. It's all a black box, and I think people who think they know are relying on their intuition. And there's nothing wrong with relying on your intuition, but your intuition can be wrong, or we may misinterpret data. I'm just letting the machine decide to interpret the data for me. Now, that said, there are times I may need to like pick and choose one thing or the other just for specific reasons, but it's pretty rare that I have to go in and add something or take something out myself.
Okay, so it's rare that you're looking at, you know, something that you see from watching a race and adjusting your model. Like you're predominantly going with the model.
Yeah, predominantly.
That's the issue with having with this show, is we don't have a lot of time, because I could nerd out with you about NASCAR for a while, and Ed could nerd out with you about math, because you're a math PhD, Nick. So, like, you know, you guys, I'm sure, could go for days talking about this stuff. Whereas I just want to talk to you about NASCAR because I'm not a PhD person, which makes me the lone wolf here for sure. But I'm glad that I have Ed there to ask the pertinent questions when it comes to that. And let's talk here a little bit, Nick, about this season, because you were talking about potentially needing to tweak the model. And one area where you may need to do some manual tweaking is with drivers on new teams. I'm sure you can utilize priors and stuff like that to try to get approximations for speeds, but we truly don't know what to expect out of some of these teams because it's, at least for like Bubba Wallace and Daniel Suarez, we don't have actual data on their teams in the past. They're brand new teams. The next-gen car coming next year has led to some new ownership. Pitbull, Michael Jordan in NASCAR now. We don't have prior data on these teams. That's tough. So how are you viewing specifically those two guys entering this year, given we have literally no data on their teams from past years?
Yeah, so a couple things you can do that are kind of data-driven are you can look at how do new teams perform in general. And then how do Bubba Wallace and Daniel Suarez perform specifically in relation to maybe their equipment? And so those are things you can say, well, this is kind of like the baseline for new teams, and maybe this driver's a little bit above average relative to his equipment, and this driver's a little below average relative to his equipment. You can kind of start there with a baseline, but it is very tough because you don't know where these teams are going to come in. I think we all have a little bit more of a hunch that Bubba Wallace with Denny Hamlin and Michael Jordan's going to have a little bit more funding than Daniel Suarez coming in. But it's a guessing game. And, that relationship, I think, with JGR will pay dividends. But I do see people saying, like, Bubba Wallace is going to win a race this year. Bubba Wallace is going to, contend for win. And I'm like, I still don't think so outside of super speedway races that it's or some crazy fluke, strategy thing. That he's going to be contending for wins with a new team, even though they're affiliated with JGR. And, I would love for him to. I think it's a great story, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time with a new team. And
it's tough, too, because, it's a new company, effectively. You're trying to get this groundwork done, and it's hard to do that in a couple of months because 2311 Racing wasn't announced until, I think, October. And, making those hires, trying to get those cars. I know that JGR is giving them the cars, but, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So I think expecting success from the jump is probably just a bit too optimistic, not because of the driver, not because of the equipment long-term, but just because it's such a short turnaround to craft a new team from the ground floor.
Yeah, and I think also if we look at these affiliated teams, how Levine Family Racing was affiliated with Joe Gibbs, or in the past Furniture Row, or we have different affiliates with different teams. The only one that's really had major success was Furniture Row after a few years with JGR. The rest have kind of just been, even the Wood Brothers racing car hasn't been like a championship contender affiliated with Team Penske there. So I'm not expecting Bubba Wallace to necessarily contend for wins. And Daniel Suarez, I think, this is really a new team that doesn't have any major affiliations. Certainly not as close as Denny Hamlin with JGR. So I'm not expecting a whole lot from these guys, but I do think it'll be a building process. And I do think Bubba Wallace will have some good runs.
Excellent. So another person that has a new ride is Kyle Larson going to Hendrick Motorsports. What do you see about this new team and partnership?
I think it's a really good match. If you look at Kyle Larson and what he did with Chip Ganassi Racing, they had a lot of ups and downs. They were pretty inconsistent. If you look, Kyle Larson had one win in his last 86 races with Ganassi. Prior to that, though, he had 3 in his previous 12 races, or 4 in his previous 22, or 5 in his previous 39. That's basically 5 wins in a season there. 36 races being a season. He had it in 39 races. So, he had the potential with Ganassi, but, Hendrick Motorsports is a different beast. They've got a 4-car team. They've been, one of the best teams in NASCAR for over 2 decades, 3 decades even. And they had 7 wins last year, including 4 of the last 11, 3 from Chase Elliott and 1 with William Byron. So I do think he is upgrading his team just a little bit. You can even look at secondary drivers like on Ganassi, like Kurt Busch or Jamie McMurray in the past, and they've won a combined 2 races in that same span of 86 races with Larson winning 1. So, 3 wins in 86 races is not 4 in the last 11 or 7 in all of last year. So I think Hendrick Motorsports is definitely going to be an upgrade for Kyle Larson. And I look for him to compete for a championship. Again, maybe there's this newness of a new team, a new crew chief, etc. Maybe there's a slow start, but Kyle Larson's a dang good racer. And I think he's going to, by midseason pick it up, even if not right away.
And I think that with the numbers you're talking about with Hendrick at the end of the year, I think that watching it kind of matched that, because you look at Chase Elliott's data in the entire playoffs, just disgusting. You're talking about loop data. His loop data was like, it was beautiful. It was magical. For those final 10 races, Alex Bowman had a lot of good runs during the playoffs as well. So I think that we saw, I know that they were a talking point early on, but it seemed like the strength for them was towards the end of the year, which is encouraging for this year. Now Kyle Larson enters 10-1 to win the championship. His teammate Chase Elliott plus 550 trying to repeat after winning the championship last year. I guess my issue, Nick, is that it's tough for me to tie up bankroll from now through November when I know it comes down to a one race sample at the end. So are you seeing any value in the championship market? Is it a market you tend to avoid for that same reason? Any thoughts on that right now?
You know, I loved the outright, championship season market coming into the 2019 season where we kind of had these big rules overhaul because I had some angles where certain drivers would benefit from it or certain drivers wouldn't. And I did really well. I did very well. But now we're 3 years into this rules kind of, there's little changes here and there on like which tracks you get 550 or 750 horsepower, et cetera. But by and large, we've kind of stabilized and the market's getting much more efficient. I think it's pretty tough to tie up bankroll for the whole year. If I were to pick one, and I haven't made any bets yet on this, but if I were to pick one, I'm torn between either Kyle Busch or Martin Truex Jr. at 8-1, just because they're both former winners, championship winners. And one of the things I really like for Martin Truex Jr. is the addition of all of these road courses. We know Chase Elliott, Martin Truex Jr. are the two road course aces. They're far and away the best two over the past like 9 or 10 road course races. The only other winner being Blaney over the past 9 regular season races outside of Truex or Elliott. So I do like Truex at 8-1. The problem is there's only one road course in the final 10. There's also Martinsville, which he's great at, but there's only one in the final 10. And then Kyle Busch, I think he's Kyle Busch. He had a down year. These things happen to every driver. New crew chief now. Maybe some changes are being made. I just find he's arguably the most talented driver still currently in the Cup Series. And he's, going at the same price as Truex, Keselowski, and Logano here. I have to, possibly go with him as well. I think it's going to take for me, maybe a couple races in the season before I go with the championship bets. But if I had to pick one now, it'd either probably be Kyle Busch or Martin Truex Jr.
So Nick, what's your approach with the Daytona 500? Are you running these random forests, or are you kind of talking about since it's the first race of the season, are you just taking the more simple numbers that you were telling us about? What's your approach?
Yeah, so Daytona 500, whole different beast, obviously. So much randomness that occurs in these races. Even with the, and again, going to 2019 with the new rules package change after the Daytona 500, they even shifted the super speedway package. It's no longer restrictor plates, right? It's tapered spacers and other aerodynamic stuff to make this draft. But still a lot of randomness. The model, some of the most accurate models I can build, period, predict about 10 to 15% of the variance in finishing position in these races. That's how hard it is to predict super speedway racing. So what I like to do is I like to simulate all of these and just figure out what's the percentage of time a driver will end up in the top 10 or the top 5 or the top 3, or what's the percentage of time he'll DNF, right? So I can run all these simulations as well, do 50,000 simulations and just kind of get percentages of these different things. So that's kind of how I approach the Daytona 500 from a betting perspective is using Monte Carlo simulation from my model to, kind of figure out what is the likely range of outcomes for each driver.
And how does that impact your betting strategy? Are you just chomping away because it's the first race of the year, hard to, hold yourself back because of that? Do you scale back? Do you have self-restraint, which most of us don't, because of that variance you were talking about? Are you going different markets because of super speedway? How does it alter you, as a bettor in your approach to that?
Yeah, well, I've always actually been a very cautious bettor. I try to find big edges. And I know a lot of people will play every edge they can get. That's totally fine. I like big edges. And in the Daytona 500, you can find big edges. Because the season is so new and markets, sports books don't necessarily adjust appropriately or over adjust in some cases. I think there can be a lot of value. I especially look for team changes. If the driver changes teams, does the book either under adjust or over adjust for those things, especially for the Daytona 500 where equipment kind of gets thrown out of the window by and large. I mean, unless you're talking like the Rick Wares or whatever, like, everything from front row to, Hendrick or Joe Gibbs has a chance to win this race.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that makes it a lot of fun. It justifies betting some long shots every now and then. So let's talk about those outrights first. Let's start there with the Daytona 500. We've got Denny Hamlin, just the best at Daytona. He's at the top of the board. Chase Elliott has been bet down quite a bit at FanDuel. He opened at 12. He's now plus 950. So it seems like a lot of interest in Chase Elliott. They're the two favorites right now. Which drivers do you like based on their current odds to win the Daytona 500 on Sunday?
Yeah, I think for me, I always have a hard time betting favorites at the Daytona 500 because it's just so hard. Every single one of them can win, right? So betting Denny Hamlin 8-1, he's amazing, but it's just so hard to say he's going to win 1 out of every 8 Daytona 500s if we ran this 8 times. And even my model doesn't necessarily think that's a good bet either. But the ones my model does like is Ricky Stenhouse Jr. 24-1. Again, take equipment out of the situation here. It doesn't matter that he's, no longer with Roush Fenway Racing, which again, even then wasn't a top team at the time. A couple decades back they were, but at the time, Ricky Stenhouse got his 2 wins. They weren't a top team. He almost won last year with his current team, JTG Doherty Racing. And he just always seems to, be up front at some point in the race. Even if he wrecks out, I don't care. All we care about is first place. Second doesn't matter, right? Second doesn't matter. So we're looking at somebody that can win. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. always seems to be at the front, and my model likes him. One other driver, and I don't go crazy on the long shots at Daytona. I do like them. My favorite long shot bet was Eric Almirola 60-1 when he moved from Petty to Stewart Haas Racing. They didn't adjust him well enough, and he was 60-1. And I thought I was going to get the win there, and Austin Dillon
had other ideas, yeah.
Had other ideas, yeah. That one hurt. But a driver that I think has been over-adjusted in the negative direction, so in other words, his odds are longer because I think they're discounting his team now, is Eric Jones at 55-1. Eric Jones has 3 top 3 finishes at super speedway races in the last 3 years and another 5th place finish. So if we're looking at the last 3 years, 12 races of super speedways, he's got 4 top 5s and 3 top 3s and a win. One of those, of course, being in the summer Daytona race. So he's won at this track. He also won the Clash last year, which was on the super speedway in the most beat up car I've ever seen possibly. But Eric Jones, 55-1. He's course, dropping down in terms of equipment, from Joe Gibbs to Richard Petty Motorsports. But we've seen Bubba Wallace almost pull off a win in the same Daytona 500 that Eric Almirola almost won. So, I think, and we've seen Bubba Wallace lead in that car multiple other times on his own merit. So, they have that Chevy alliance and everything. And I should say this, I'm really intrigued by the Chevy alliance in general this year, where Hendrick and Childress are now partnering in the engine department. But overall, I think Eric Jones at 55-1 is super value to win. So those are my 2, Ricky Stenhouse and Eric Jones.
I mean, Bubba was leading with 2 laps to go in August last year, when, Logano passed him and then Hamlin, bumped in the back of him and caused that big wreck. But, he was leading then. Eric Almirola won with Petty at Daytona as well. So, I think that it is an equipment downgrade, but we potentially could be seeing an overreaction as a result of that for Eric Jones.
Yep.
All right, so there aren't a lot of non-outright markets posted so far as we're talking here on Wednesday. And I'm assuming after the duels on Thursday, we'll get more of those. But anything you're seeing right now in race props, head-to-heads that you like based on what you've seen, or anything you're looking out for once more markets are posted?
Yeah, so a lot of it is what I'm looking out for. Right now, I don't have a whole lot in terms of things that interest me immediately. I will say Eric Jones, top 10 plus 250, is more than double his top 10 rate at restrictor plate, super. I still have a hard time saying super speedway races. And triple, his top 10 rate is triple if you remove his rookie year. Under the current package especially. So I do like Eric Jones again for a top 10. I love betting top 3s, 5s, and 10s at super speedway races because winning's so hard. And then half the field's probably going to wreck out anyway. That leaves a 50-50 shot for most drivers to make the top 10. And so if you can just find value in top 10s, I really like hitting those. So Eric Jones is one I'm looking at. William Byron has had a lot of top fives at these races, and he won last year. So William Byron's a guy that I'm intrigued by for top 5 value. And then finally, there's one other driver that I think we should keep an eye on. I was looking, and in certain books, Anthony Alfredo is 500 to 1 to win. Now, I don't like the win value, but if you turn that into top 10 value, he's in Front Row Motorsports. He's the same equipment as Michael McDowell or David Reagan's been in the past, and David Reagan is trying to race this year as well. So he's got teammates to work with. I don't think he's necessarily a great super speedway racer, but they're pricing him in the same range as Cody Ware or BJ McLeod or all these other guys that are just like in the worst possible equipment. And Anthony Alfredo's in equipment that can definitely top 10. And we've seen Michael McDowell take the lead in races or David Reagan take the lead in races in Front Row Motorsports equipment. So I don't love it, but I think for a top 10, if he's something like 7 to 1, I think I don't mind that at all. But I'm still keeping an eye on it head-to-heads. I'm an underdog head-to-head bettor at super speedway races. So anything that's on the plus side, I will probably be betting. I do tend to go a little crazy at super speedway races with plus head-to-head bets.
I love it. Anthony Alfredo, watch now. I mean, probably the only time we'll hear that name this entire year from a betting perspective.
Quite possibly.
Quite possibly. So we'll see how that goes. But keep an eye out for that. And keep an eye out for all the work of Nick Giffen over at the Action Network and on Fantasy Labs. Make sure you follow him on Twitter as well at RotoDoc. Nick, we appreciate the time. Thank you so much. And good luck to you Thursday. Good luck to you Friday,
Nick.
Saturday, Sunday. We appreciate it.
That's right. Hey, looking forward to a great season. Thank you for having me on.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Covering the present.
So we had a couple of shows heading into Super Bowl 55. We had the one with George Charuri and then the one with JJ Zachariason and Aaron Dolan talking props. You can find George on Twitter at PFF_George. JJ is late round QB and Aaron is Aaron K. Dolan. And between all of us, you, Ed, and Aaron both were on the Bucks. And you wanted the Bucks +3. Aaron had the Bucks money line, which at the time was about +144. George had the Chiefs -3, and I had the Bucks under 26.5 points. And the money line did move in the Bucks' favor. Specifically Sunday, there was a lot of Tampa Bay money coming in. The spread stayed the same, steady at 3, but the money line movement was pretty noteworthy and helpful for Aaron. And the Bucks dominated that game. Good call by all of you there. And I think that obviously you don't expect the Chiefs to score 9 points, like you said.
No, not at
But
all.
there were a lot of data reasons to expect it to at least be a competitive game. So getting the 3 points, getting the plus money on the money line, I think both those from a process perspective did make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think so. And, it's one of these things like, it was kind of like the Carson Wentz thing earlier in the year. We're saying he's going to go back to NFL average, and instead he goes all the way the other way, right?
Right.
So we were just kind of saying, it's going to be a close game, which it wasn't. So,
Right.
But at least the number landed on the right side of where the market was. And I do feel there was a little bit of overexuberance on Kansas City just because of how they played against the Buffalo game, and a little bit how they played against Cleveland, although that defense is such trash that I don't know how anyone can really.
Right. We talked about that on the show, too. We said there was a Mahomes tax, effectively. And like, we talk about that with Brady a lot, but I think now it's more so an effect on Mahomes. And I think we saw that with the numbers, not just with the spread in the money line, but also the total. The total was 56.5. George wanted the over 56.5. JJ wanted under 55.5 because that was where it was when we talked. And it bounced back and forth between 56.5 and 55.5. And just finished with 40 points in this game. The Chiefs, again, didn't show up at all, but the under was the right play here. Good call by JJ on that one. I forget, did you mention anything about the total on the Thursday show last week?
I mean, my numbers had under. I didn't bet it. So, I mean, I would have leaned that way, but clearly didn't have enough faith in it to pull the trigger.
Yeah, okay, so we had that from the traditional markets. From a props perspective, George and I were both heavy on Leonard Fournette. George had him as an anytime touchdown score at +125. When we talked on Thursday, that number had slid to +165, so I had that. I also had the over on Fournette's rushing yards at 48.5, and to score any time at 165, and then Ronald Jones under 35.5 yards. The markets did not move in my favor because Jones's prop went up, Fournette's went down. I think he closed at 46.5. Jones closed at 37.5, and It also moved against where George got Fournette's number, but George was correct. Fournette did score. He was awesome in the game, got the touchdown, 89 rushing yards, 46 receiving yards. So George got his touchdown prop. I did not get my same game parlay, though, because Jones went over 35.5. He had a super long run. I had also, didn't mention this in the show, but I had CEH against Jones rushing yards for plus money, and he got that big run, and CEH was down like 30 yards, and I was like, oh, geez, this is going to be a rough one. But then CEH finished 64, Jones at 61, so didn't get the same game parlay, but did get the CEH versus Jones, and did,
nice.
If you bet the Fournette stuff individually, that would have gone well. But the Chiefs' inability and I get a lack of interest in stopping the run, something we had talked about on the show, I just didn't think the Bucs would be good enough to exploit it, personally. I thought that the Fournette number was inefficient because of workload. I didn't think they'd be as good as they were, though.
Right, and the Bucs weren't good enough on 4th and goal from the 1, right?
True.
Which was a huge play, right? Like, I mean, if you're watching that game, you're thinking that's the play that really gets Kansas City back in the game, and they can cover it and whatever. But yeah, later they were able to soften them up a little bit, and I think when you look at that Kansas City run defense over enough plays, Tampa Bay's got a little bit of theirs, and I mean, I don't think I did mention it on the show, but I probably should have mentioned that, they're the worst rush defense by adjusted success rate. And that's not the first year in a row that they've been that. So, I mean, it's just the way they play. It's probably the right move overall. And obviously, definitely the great game script didn't help them, right? Because they're meant to get up and then, play against the pass where that run defense doesn't matter as much. And their best interior lineman, Chris Jones, can rush the passer, and because he led their team in sacks. So, I mean, everything kind of worked against them, and Tampa Bay was really good.
Yeah, they certainly were. Other props we had, we were both on interception props. You had that Brady would not throw a pick. I think it was plus 132 when we talked. I had Mahomes to throw a pick. He was plus 150 when I bet it. I think it closed at plus 124. You can say, hey, Brady had one overturned by penalty, but you can't cheat. They cheated. That's why there was a penalty called. So, you won that bet. Tom Brady did not throw a pick. Mahomes did throw 2, actually, so should have bet the alternate market and gotten 2 there, but I'll take my 1 for sure. And I think that it's a good lesson that, just think about the way these games can play out, and if you can get plus money either way, that's going to be interesting for sure.
Yeah, I think with the Brady pick, it went off the receiver's hands, so there was some bad luck there to get picked, but then you get some good luck in the penalty, which I don't think was the greatest penalty call in the world, but, I'll take it. And then the only thing I kind of regret about it is, I was looking at Mahomes to throw a pick at plus money. I think it was plus 120 before Brady, and I never ended up pulling the trigger, just thinking, Mahomes never throws picks. Right. But he got in a situation where they were down, had to come back, and that led to those interceptions. And, he was on the run all game, I mean,
and when that happens, that's when you put yourself in position to throw picks. When you are forced to scramble, forced to improvise, he's obviously very good in those scenarios, but those are also higher variance plays. We talked about that with Dr. Eric Eager about how, that's a high variance play. That can lead to negative outcomes. That's what we saw in Sunday's game.
Yeah, and you have to give credit to Tampa Bay secondary. Yeah. I mean, even early in the game, there was a lot of plays where Mahomes had a little bit of time to throw, but didn't really go downfield with it. Yeah. And I think they played really well. They were there in all those scramble plays where Mahomes had to make a play downfield. They were there. So I mean, I personally felt Todd Bowles should have been the MVP. They don't really do it. They don't really do it like that. But yeah, what an incredible plan that they executed.
As a former Jets fan, as someone who retroactively very much appreciates Todd Bowles, not his punt decision making, but overall head coaching abilities, I agree. Todd Bowles should have been MVP of that game. He was tremendous. But because Aaron had Tom Brady as MVP, I'll give them some leeway and be okay with it from that perspective as well.
I mean, this is why I really don't like betting on MVP.
Yeah.
Because it's this was the perfect game where you could have made a case for a number of people, right? And it's no one is going to be that upset about the fact that Devin White didn't get the MVP because
no, people were very upset.
Exactly. If there's no money on that, people aren't going to be upset about that, right? So
exactly.
But anyways, yeah, I it's not a particular market that I really like.
Yeah, in New York, you can't bet on the MVP markets. I'm just going to stay in New York. The two weeks between the Super Bowl and the Super Bowl and the conference championships next year. Lesson learned. Also, Chris Godwin did not play well, so 2 lessons learned.
Chris
sure.
Godwin didn't get thrown to.
I think he had 5 yards.
I think he got 2 targets on the first play, and I don't remember.
I saw Rufus had he profited big time, I will say, from Chris Godwin not doing anything. So
yes.
Rufus Peabody had a very good day because of Chris Godwin. Did he talk about that on your show?
He talked about that on my show, and
yeah.
Rufus is the kind of guy that I can't be like, hey, Rufus, give me a pick.
Right.
So, I talked around it, and he's like, yeah, I like Godwin under receptions and under yards, and he got that. So anyways, I had a great Super Bowl. I think, honestly, we're going to talk about fading some of my stuff next year, Super Bowl, just like we did with JJ this year.
Well, the problem is JJ did well here because he had the under. So, we can't even fading JJ didn't work. Maybe that means that you won't regress next year either. Maybe that means that you're just good at what you do.
Yeah, hopefully. So anyways, it was quite good. I felt pretty good about Mahomes under 329 yards in the first quarter when he had 9 passing yards. And then everyone that was on my show. So Rufus came on, gave Godwin under those unders, and then I had Matt Friedman on as well. And he came on. It was like the number one rule is to usually bet unders, and we talked about the psychology behind that. And he gave out, just like JJ, he gave out Darrell Williams under 29. Which hit. He had 2 carries. So the process there was CEH is coming back. Darrell Williams isn't getting a lot of carries. That definitely worked out. And then the one over he did give was Kelsey.
Yeah.
So it was an unbelievable week on my show, and for me. So
subscribe to the Football Analytics Show. Make sure you do that. Make sure we get that out of the way too. So Ed's numbers doing well. Ed's bets doing well. Ed's guests doing well. A good week all around, and hopefully it was profitable for you as well as listeners for Super Bowl 55. Looking forward to having a similar show next year because it was a blast on Thursday having a live show and having Aaron and JJ on. Follow JJ on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Aaron is at Aaron K. Dolan, and George Charuri is at PFF_George. We're going to talk Daytona 500 here in just 1 second with Dr. Nick Giffen, but first, racing season finally here, and there's no better place to bet than on FanDuel. FanDuel is offering a special promotion for the big race. Place a pre-race wager on a driver, and even if he loses, if he comes in the top 5, FanDuel will refund your bet. Bet on your favorite racer to win, and placing top 5 is just a bonus. The Daytona 500 is Sunday, February 14th. Got Denny Hamlin, Joey Logano, Brad Keselowski, and Sunday is only a few days away. So go download the FanDuel Sportsbook app and bet today. Must be 21 plus and present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, West Virginia, Indiana, Colorado, Tennessee, Iowa, Virginia, or Michigan. Refund issues a non-withdrawable site credit. Max refund $50. Terms apply. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In West Virginia, visit 1-800-GAMBLER.net. In Indiana, call 1-800-9-WITH-IT. In Colorado, call 1-800-522-4700. In Iowa, call 1-800-BETS-OFF. Let's bring on Dr. Nick Giffen now to preview the Daytona 500. Get you some thoughts on that bet that you won over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Again, he does content for the Action Network and Fantasy Labs, and also does the NASCAR DFS models for Fantasy Labs. Let's get his thoughts here on Sunday's race.
Covering the future.
Big thank you once again to Dr. Nick Giffen for swinging by and breaking down the Daytona 500. Again, follow him on Twitter at RotoDoc. And Ed, I like having these mathy people like Dr. Nick Giffen, Dr. Eric Eager on because, again, like I said, I can let you do the heavy lifting with the math stuff, which I'm sure several of our listeners understand, but I don't. So I'm glad that I have you to ask the smart questions and I can ask the dumber ones. I appreciate that.
Well, Jim, I have you to all the NASCAR questions because guess what? I don't know much about NASCAR. So coming into this interview, I was kind of like, okay, what race is it? Okay, Daytona 500, got it. But then he started talking about random force. I was like, oh, that rings a bell. So my last non-sports job was at Sandia National Lab out in California, and I looked into, did a little bit of work with some of these decision trees and worked with some people that did that type of predictive modeling. So, it was fun. And, I could have spent another 20 minutes asking about what went into that Monte Carlo method that he was talking about at the end. So might have to save that for an appearance on the Football Analytics Show.
Yeah, I'd recommend Nick. He also does football stuff, so it's not just NASCAR. He's a very talented dude, does a lot of different stuff, DFS focused, but also betting. So would recommend for the Football Analytics Show, get the longer form discussion out there for Nick. And I would listen to that as well.
Yeah. Well, Jim, anytime you find a PhD that can speak that well, you gotta.
I know, right?
Gotta take advantage of it. Because that's
we're 3 for 3 between you, Eric, and Nick, so I'm good. That like slants my view of PhDs. So
those are 3. I mean, yeah. In terms of the speaking, that's not how it usually goes.
Right, but I like it. So it's definitely been a good experience for me, making me smarter. So thank you to Nick, and thank you to you as well for asking the good questions. Let's dive into covering the future for this week. And Ed, you're taking this week off because you've done a lot of work the past couple of months, and we got college basketball. Is that your next focus, college basketball coming up now that NFL is over?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, perfect. So we'll get into that in the coming weeks. But I did want to get my thoughts on Daytona out there, and I'm not going to do a ton of NASCAR stuff throughout the year now because we did it last year a lot because there was nothing else going on. But it's the Daytona 500. I got to talk about my stuff here. I'm excited for it for sure. So in addition to Nick, I'm also building out some win sims for NASCAR using the model that I created 2 years ago that we talked about here on the show. And that means rather than looking at guys with various ratings in my model and seeing how guys in those ranges have done, I can actually sim it out and see who shows value. And there is some value near the top of the board this week with a couple of Penske drivers, Joey Logano and Ryan Blaney. They're both 12-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook. I know, shocker, back on Ryan Blaney. But my win sims have Logano winning 10.1% of the time. That's the highest in the field. Blaney is third at 9.8%. Their implied odds, based on the odds of FanDuel Sportsbook, are 7.7%. So value there. Lower in the chain, you heard Nick talk about William Byron. He is 20-1, but my win sims actually have him winning 7% of the time, so 2.24 percentage points of value there. For the longer shots, the options for me are Christopher Bell and Tyler Reddick. They're both 40-1. The win sims show value in them. And that's what the win sims say, and I think that they're all in play, but I'm not going to give out 5 dudes for outrights in the show. That's kind of cheating. So I'm going to narrow things down to top 2. I'm going to go with Joey Logano at the top and Tyler Reddick as the longer option for the recommendations here. Logano almost won at Daytona last year. I mentioned this with Nick. He had taken the lead with 2 laps to go. Got a bad bump draft from behind, wound up wrecking, didn't win there. But he's a 4-time winner on the pack tracks. He has not won at Daytona since 2015, but he is consistently at the front, consistently leading laps, and that puts you in position to win races, and I think that is good for Logano. The Fords work really well together, so if I'm picking near the top, I will go with Logano as my favorite guy relative to odds at FanDuel Sportsbook. The reason I like Tyler Reddick is his track record in the lower series. He has 3 wins on the super speedways between the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series. 2 of those wins were in Daytona, 1 in the Truck Series, 1 in the Xfinity Series, so he's a good, proven racer on these tracks. That just didn't show up for him during his rookie season. That's a 4-race sample, and I think the odds here are selling him a bit short. His teammate Austin Dillon won here back in 2018. We talked about that too when he wrecked Eric Almirola. Austin Dillon 20-1. Reddick is 40-1. So we know the equipment can get the job done. Getting that discount on Reddick to me is enticing for sure. So I think that he is a great option. So my sims see value on Logano, Blaney, Byron, Bell, and Reddick. So if you like any of those guys, I think that all of them very defensible bets. But my official recommendations for covering the future will be Joey Logano at 12-1, Tyler Reddick at 40-1, and I'm sure the listeners relieved to know that Blaney was not an official recommendation, although I did have to mention at least that he was still in there. Ed, this was the race we were talking about last night, was the Busch Clash, and it was at Daytona but the road course. Ryan Blaney was leading with like 2 turns left. His best friend is behind him, Chase Elliott, and he wrecks him. So I thankfully did not bet Ryan Blaney this time, because if I had, I think my brain would have exploded. So many bad beats with him last year. I am glad I was not on that train for once last night.
Well, that's good. That's good. So when you're thinking about these races, like how many, like if you're just looking at overall the market for the winner, like how many different bets are you putting in? Like
I try to cap it at 3. It also depends on what the numbers are, because like let's say it's Fontana. They're not racing at Fontana this year, but that was the second race last year. If they were going to Fontana for the next race, it's harder to bet long shots. And if I'm going to bet 3 guys with odds at 20 to 1 or shorter, that's not going to net me a big profit, even if I'm right. So I think that it depends on the track. For Daytona, I'm okay throwing out more because I can bet guys like Reddick who are 40 to 1 and feel pretty good about that. But like if it's a track where equipment matters a lot and the pool of drivers who can realistically win is smaller, like I'm just capping myself if I decide to go too hard at it, which is why I want to narrow it down to 2 for the show here today. For this year's Daytona 500, I have outrights on 4 guys. That is mostly because I got itchy. Not what I'd recommend in practice, but I thought there were good numbers on a couple of guys. So I did go up to 4, but like that's more than I realistically want to do. Interesting.
And so, I mean, if you're betting 3 guys every race, so you're expecting to win, depending on the odds, obviously, but like you're expecting to win one of those every few races or something. Roughly.
Effectively, yeah. And it depends on the odds, like because like was it? I don't remember what race it was last year. It was Logano won in Las Vegas. I had him, but he was like I think 10 to 1 at the time. Like that's why I don't want to go with too many outrights. Now, obviously, like the amount you're betting on the outrights does vary as well. Like I'm okay putting more down on a favorite to win to try to increase the profit of that, but it does depend on the track, depends on the race, depends on the outright numbers of the guys that I'm betting. But to me, I really do want to cap it to make sure I'm not overextending myself because you can't win multiple of those bets. So I think it's a good question to ask because people may be getting into NASCAR for the first time, but make sure you're not getting too hard in a market where you can't win multiple ways. Good question, though. I think that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, for sure.
Alrighty, that is all that we have for today here on Covering the Spread. As mentioned, back again next week with another show talking about maybe some NBA, maybe some college basketball, maybe NHL, who knows? But regardless, we'll be back here next week on Covering the Spread. So make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcast. And again, like I said, while you're there, leave us a rating and review. Ed, what is going on for you this week over at the Power Rank and the Football Analytics Show?
Yeah, not much actually, but as we head into March Madness, definitely when you sign up for my free email newsletter the day before the tournament or 2 days before the tournament, I'll send you my cheat sheet that makes it drop dead easy to fill out your bracket. These are based on my public points-based numbers, and probably going to put together a video of how well they've done over the last 11, 12 years. It's pretty good. So, the free newsletter is over at thepowerrank.com.
I'll get my testimonial in there, too, for winning the numberFire brackets. So that is great. Make sure to check it out again, thepowerrank.com, and check out Ed on Twitter at thepowerrank. I am at Jim Sonnes, JIMSANNES. You can follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. If you want more thoughts on NASCAR, we have our daily fantasy podcast, the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. We'll have one for the duels at Daytona, which are Thursday night, and one for the Daytona 500 going up on Friday as well on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. Big thank you to Dr. Nick Giffen for swinging by and breaking down his thoughts on the Daytona 500. Follow Nick on Twitter at RotoDoc and check out his work at the Action Network and Fantasy Labs. Big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for running the video side of things here today. Thank you, Cal, as always, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Good luck to you with your bets for the Daytona 500. We'll talk to you once again next week. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.